populated residential areas. And this is where the tragedy really was visible and was palpable, because we also realized that the area that was the most affected is the area where you have Beirut's most creative people, those who meet on a daily basis to design a country free of corruption, those who hang out in order to live a life that is free from the traditions and sectarian mentalities in Lebanon. This is where these people mingle. And that part of Beirut, that heart of a vibrant Beirut, was the most severely hit.
So what the current kind of going theory on what caused this explosion is nothing else and nothing more than government incompetence and negligence. That seems to be the most likely scenario, even though there still aren't real answers as to what happened, because there hasn't been an investigation. There's a big question mark about what kind of investigation should take place. Some people in Lebanon are asking for an international investigation. There is sort of reluctance on the part of the authorities to have an international investigation, but we do know that, for example, French experts, but also American FBI agents are in Beirut kind of checking out the scene. Around you, and where do you think sort of what should happen really in terms of the investigation? Do you think it's very important to figure out exactly what happened?
The problem that we are discussing is a clear indicator of everything that is wrong about Lebanon. The fact that almost 4 weeks after such a major blast, that we still don't have anything tangible on the side of the authorities, absolutely no accountability mechanism, absolutely no credible investigation taking place, epitomizes everything that is wrong about Lebanon and makes us understand how such a blast was even possible in the first place, given the fact that we have authorities who do not feel compelled to hold anyone accountable, who do not feel compelled to actually open their files and actually reveal what they knew in order to prevent the next tragedy. The problem in Lebanon is that a shipment of ammonium nitrate reached the port of Beirut in very shady circumstances, not really knowing why this particular ship left its route from Georgia to Mozambique to actually come to Beirut. A lot of theories exist, but absolutely no clear answer. So this shipment arrived in 2013. It was offloaded in 2014 in a way that doesn't respect any of the international standards. It's been since 2014 that several security and judiciary bodies have been warning against the danger of having such warehouse in Beirut, so close to residential areas. Absolutely nothing was done, while dozens of authorities, whether ministers, whether presidents, prime ministers, knew about it and did absolutely nothing. So I think we would be naive to believe that they would be actually open now to investigate in a free and independent way. And this is the only thing that can actually bring some comfort to the people who lost everything, to know what truly happened and have all the political covers, all the political shields that protect our corrupt politicians removed once and for all. We owe that to the 200 people who lost their lives.
Ayman, before we delve into more detail on what's going on right now in Beirut, 3.5 weeks after the explosion, but also talk about the initiative that your foundation has launched, I'd like to just take a step back, widen the lens a bit, and sort of explain to those who are listening to us, why should they care about Lebanon? It's a tiny country. There's like 5 million people there. It doesn't really have much natural resources. There are bigger fish to fry, more important geopolitical and security sort of problems to think about. And yet, after the explosion, we saw so much more international attention being given to the small piece of land. French President Emmanuel Macron was on the ground within 48 hours, but also David Hale from the State Department was there. The Iranian Foreign Minister, Jawad Zarif, was there. The Qatari and Saudi, almost everyone you can think of, at least
the Canadian foreign minister is in Beirut now as well, yes.
So why? Why so much attention?
I think we can, of course, have a very narcissistic view about Lebanon, Lebanon-centric view of the world. It's unfortunately very common among us Lebanese. Everybody loves our food. Everybody knows some of our musicians and our actresses. But to be more security focused, I think Lebanon is on the nexus of three very major dynamics. The first one is the self-evident one, given the geographic location of Lebanon and its proximity with so many contentious points in the Middle East. Israel is on our southern border, and the Israeli-Arab conflict in general, Israeli-Palestinian conflict in particular, haven't been resolved. We're also the neighbors of Syria, which is at our northern and eastern borders, and the conflict in Syria also is another symbol of everything that is going wrong in geopolitics these days around the world. It's a place for proxy war between so many different powers, Iran, Turkey, but also a very strong involvement of Russia. Also, the Americans have presence on the ground. Special forces from many European countries are operating on the Syrian sphere. And Lebanon is the country in the world that has the highest number of refugees per capita, mostly from Syria. And we also know how sensitive the issue of refugees is for Europe and the rest of the world. So this is the first element. The second element is that the issue of managing diversity in divided societies is becoming a global discussion. It's true that it is not as security problematic today as the conflict in Syria is, but we know how much the issue of diversity, of the coexistence of people belonging to different ethnicities, to different religions, can be a problem not only in developing countries. It's something that is on a daily basis providing reason for political action in Europe, in the United States, in Canada. Northern Ireland is an example. The issue of managing diversity is key. If in Lebanon we fail at developing a model for a peaceful and intelligent coexistence of people belonging to different backgrounds and culture, it can have repercussions beyond Lebanon. And the third and major element is this kind of new civic awakening that we see among young people all over the world, young people who do not feel represented anymore by the traditional political parties, who coalesce and act and advocate outside party politics on the streets. It is happening also in Lebanon. And similarly to many similar movements around the world, it's not necessarily leading to political change, but it's also a laboratory for how young people organize, help each other, advocate for political change outside the traditional ways of doing politics. And these voices, these young voices, and I'm close to some of them, have a strong resonance in other countries in the West where we studied in Western universities. So we've also managed to develop networks with people who today serve in the administration of the EU, in the administration of France, the UK, the United States. So this also adds a layer to the proximity and to this focus on Lebanon that we feel every day.
And what about sort of great power competition, just to bring it down to the Lebanese level? Do you feel like the current political deadlock, just so that people who don't follow Lebanon every day are aware? So 3 weeks ago, the explosion happened. About a week later, the government resigned, a government that was already extremely embattled because there were protests, as Ayman was just referencing, since October, demanding a complete overhaul of the political system. So this government has now resigned, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of real solution on the horizon in terms of forming a government that is both responds to the demands on the street, but also is kind of conciliatory or allows the traditional entrenched political parties to also have a role. And of course, we can't talk about Lebanon without talking about Hezbollah and the role it plays in the political sphere, because, you know, perhaps foreigners know it as an armed group that, you know, is active in many countries, especially in Syria, for example. But it's also part of the political sphere and you know, sort of groups in Lebanon, but it has these real ties to Iran. We're seeing the US maximum security pressure play out. You know, we're seeing France trying to bring about an initiative and a way out. How much do you think the dynamics outside of Lebanon between these countries are actually being reflected in the current deadlock today?
Lebanese people always tend to think that the entire world revolves around Lebanon in a certain way, or that all the actions related to Lebanon are motivated by grander decisions. I think it is time for us Lebanese to be more modest. It is true that Lebanon is tied to the regional arena, specifically to what is happening with Iran, what is happening between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between the United States and Iran. Yes, and Lebanon pays the price or benefits from whatever change happen at that level. But at the same time, it is time for us to listen carefully to the message that was clearly sent by France. Help yourself to help you. And this is something that it is very important for us to focus on today. We can blame Iran and the United States all we want, but this will not change the reality of the Lebanese people tomorrow. What we are fighting against today is a political system that is immune to any form of reform because it contradicts its very essence. Our political parties pretend to represent the various sects and religious communities in the country. The fact that Hezbollah is so strong, is so armed, and can impose whatever it wants on the grand scheme of things in Lebanon also provides a cover for other sectarian parties that oppose Hezbollah to refuse any change, because they're saying, why should we reform while Hezbollah is still that strong and nothing can change it? So we will maintain our corrupt politics, we will maintain our rhetoric saying that we are protecting our community because Hezbollah is doing the same. So you have parties, regardless of their alliances, that actually perpetuate an old way of doing politics that prevent any kind of reform. In addition, these political parties, how do they get funding? Either by receiving money from foreign sponsors, therefore they are not accountable to the Lebanese people and don't care about reform, or they benefit from kickbacks and from public procurement. So basically they steal government money through kickbacks and all different forms of corruption in order to stay alive and stay active as political parties. When we demand reform, when the IMF demands reform, when every single friend of Lebanon outside Lebanon demands reform in order to help a country that is on the verge of an economic collapse that goes above and beyond anything we've seen in Greece, anything we've seen in Venezuela, we have a political class that still refuses to change anything because it does not want to commit suicide. Today the equation is clear. Either the political class of Lebanon, including Hezbollah, and actually supported by Hezbollah, maintains its way of doing politics, and if this happens, the entire country collapses. And this is a major geostrategic and security problems for the region and the rest of the world. Or finally, with local pressure and international pressure, there is a certain opening in the political sphere to open the way for a temporary independent government of heavyweight experts who have good relations locally, including with the parties and the international community, and who commit to at least some basic reforms that would allow some oxygen to come back to the country.
And so I want to actually, just to jump on that, there's a question that was just submitted, excuse me, that says, it's actually just a follow-up on what Ayman was just saying. Everybody likes to mention, and it's from Andrei Matishak, I hope I didn't butcher your name. Everybody likes to mention the words Lebanon and reforms in the same sentence. But Ayman, from your perspective, what kind of reforms does Lebanon need? Where to start? And what would be your preference?
First, to stop stealing basic government contracts that were funded by the international community. I'll give you a simple example. There is a dam project, water dam project, southeast of Beirut, that is decried by every single environmental expert, geologist, with every single piece of evidence that it would not collect water. It would not actually fit with the geology, with the land we have, and at the same time would lead to the destruction of wild forests in Lebanon. And this project has been funded, or there is a grant from the World Bank, up to $600 million to fund it. Up until this second, the government of Lebanon, the caretaker government of Lebanon, insists on maintaining this project where the public works companies that will be implementing it are extremely tied to the politicians who are running the Ministry of Energy and Water. And even the World Bank is saying, actually, we're okay with Lebanon not using the money there and turning it for things that are more urgent related to COVID-19 or to the Beirut port explosion. And the Lebanese government insists on maintaining this universally decried corrupt project. So first, stop stealing. Second element is independence of the judiciary. As long as the Lebanese judiciary continues to be fully controlled by the politicians, there is no way forward. And the third major reform is related to how we elect our public officials. I'm not necessarily talking about a complete overhaul of the political system, but some improvements to the electoral code in order to reduce gerrymandering and create a more leveled playing field that would allow for a fairer competition. These would be the three entry points for reform in Lebanon.
And I'm sorry, that's going to have to be our last point. We tried to kind of give you an overview of the quite complex situation in Lebanon right now. I hope you'll continue following it, and you will be able to also kind of support Lebanon however you can if you are able to. Thank you to Ayman for this very interesting chat, and to all of you for joining us. Please stay tuned for the next session titled Countering Terrorism in Virtual and Decentralized Space.
The Central European jihadis are jihadis without a jihad, meaning they have no support of a jihadi ecosystem. There are no jihadi veterans around, there are no recruiters or entrepreneurs, there are no families with histories of jihadi involvement either, and there are no radical mosques exist.